For some people, writing and editing content is easy. For others, it's a lot more difficult. But whatever side of the writing fence you sit on, there are some key steps that you can take in order to give that content a fighting chance of ranking in Google. In this video, I'm going to show you how to take your content idea, come up with a plan for that content that will put it on a level playing field with the rest of the competition, and how to structure that content so that it appeals to search engines but real humans too. Now don't worry if you don't know your H1s from your meta titles, we're going to be covering it all in this video, but hopefully you do know about real humans. Hey there affiliate schoolers, and to those of you who are new to this channel, please consider subscribing, especially if learning more about affiliate marketing and earning money online sounds like your cup of tea. And if you find value in this video, please hit that like button, as it tells me that you like this sort of content and I'll create more of it. So the first step when it comes to creating content is the planning. And this is important whether you're planning on writing the content yourself, outsourcing it to a writer, or even if you're using an AI tool. It all starts with the keyword idea, and we're not going to cover keyword research in this video, but if you do want to take a look at how to conduct keyword research, I have got a video on that. I'll link that in the description below. Watch this video first and then hop over to that, because that's really going to help you out. Now, once I've got a keyword, the way I tend to work is to reverse engineer what the competition do. So my starting point quite often is to go to Google and to take a look at who is ranking for that particular keyword, and I'm going to be looking at things like word counts. I'm going to be looking at the way in which articles are written, the type of content that they include. So if it's a buyer's guide, for example, I'm going to be looking at how many products they cover on that particular page. I might also look at things like frequently asked questions and information around that particular type of product. Once I've got an idea of the content that we need to create, I'm going to put together a content plan. And I would do that whether I'm writing the content myself or whether I'm going to supply a writer with a content brief. Now, a content brief is going to be more detailed, and I'll show you later on at the end of this video how we can put a content brief together, and that's really important. But for now, let's take a look at an example of this in action, and we'll use my Coffee Grind Guru case study website to demonstrate this planning phase. So we're going to start off with this keyword here, this Dura Z6 review keyword, and we can see that using keywords everywhere, that's telling us this keyword has around 140 searches per month on average, so it's fairly worthwhile going after. It's fairly low competition. If we turn on our SERPworks tool, and the first thing really that I'm going to look at is look at the word counts for the websites that are ranking. I mean, see, this one's almost 3,500. This one's about 2.5. This one's 2.3. This one's 3. 2.6. So instantly we can look at that, and what I would tend to do is to take an average of the top 3 or 4. So for this keyword, I would be looking at around 2,500 words of content. So that's our first decision made. And then what we can do is we can take a look at some of these on the top 3 and look at the types of content they include. Interestingly, we can see that they've got a comparison table between the Z6 and the Z8. That might be something that we want to include. We can see that it talks about the way in which the product is made. They talk about a comparison between old and new. They've got a lot of specs here, so we might want to include a specs table, more information, quite a lot of detail here actually. They talk about the milk frother. They've got some unordered lists. If we look at this bean to cup coffee machines one, so they've got their summary up at the top, then they've got an overview, look and feel, features, some important things to note, and then their conclusion. So not as nice to look at, but much more simple in terms of structure. And then let's just take a look at this homegrounds.co. Again, the summary is up at the top, that's interesting. And then we can see they talk about design, the way in which it brews, the quality of the coffee that comes from it, cleaning, maintenance, value for money, a bit of a warning, and then a verdict again at the bottom. And they also include references to where they've got bits of information from. So what I will tend to do here with a review piece of content like this is, again, whether I'm going to write this myself or send it to a writer, I'm going to have an example competitor, and I'm going to have my link to my product. In this case, it's on Amazon. And then I'm going to break down how I want the sections to look. So I'm going to look at 150 words on the intro. First impressions, I was looking at about 250 words. This is sometimes a section that I include, sometimes I don't. Now in this case, because we had a lot of overviews right up at the top, or verdicts, and that's good for conversion as well, we might want to have that above our intro. So we might include an overview in here, or a summary, or something like that, around 200 words, maybe a little bit less. Our introduction, first impressions, the actual machine itself. So in this case, it was the Dura Z6, I believe. And that's going to be the bulk of the, or certainly a decent chunk of content. Then I like to include something about actually using the machine itself. And that's going to be a big old section as well. And then we might have some either common questions or FAQs, however you kind of want to describe that. And then a verdict again at the end. And then if we take a look at that, we've got 500, 1,000, 1,500. We've got around just over 2,000 words there. So we potentially would maybe add in a couple of other sections, and we can just go back to the competition and look at, again, the sort of things that they include, maybe something to do with the design, something to do with the brewing system maybe, and look at that. But then what we're going to want to do is, for those FAQs, we can very easily find these. Google gives us these, so we can go down here and we can just look at what the people also ask questions are. So for most keywords that you search on Google, you're going to get this people also ask section. And we can look through these. Is the Dura Z6 worth it? Is it discontinued? Can it make Americano? That's a really good question. And then if we start clicking on these, it's going to give us even more. So how do I clean the Dura Z6 grinder? Again, that's a good question that we could include. Milk container, and this is essentially giving us the information, this is giving us the questions that people want the answers to. So Google gives us all of this, so it would be crazy for us not to include this information in our content, because people are already asking these questions. And then we can also potentially rank for these questions too. Now, once we've got our plan in place, we're going to need to decide whether to write it ourselves or to outsource this to a writer. Now, if we are going to outsource it to a writer, I would certainly want to give them more information than what we just saw on the screen there. And at the end of this video, I will be sharing with you that content brief that I give to all of my writers. So make sure you stick around to the end to watch that. It's really useful. Now, the next step is probably the most important step, and that is the writing of the content itself. Now, if you've got a good enough grasp of the English language, I would suggest that you, at least when you're starting out, that you take on the writing yourself, because you're going to learn so much about the writing process. And then when you do come to outsource to writers in the future, you're going to understand some of the stumbling blocks that they might come across. And you're just going to know a lot more about that writing process. So it's easier for you to quality control what's coming back in. And you'll have a better understanding of your expectations, what you expect them to produce for you. And the first thing that I would suggest that you look for when it comes to creating the content, or when it comes to writing, is to find your tone of voice. And this is a decision that needs to be made really on a website by website basis, because you're going to have some websites that are going to need a more professional tone. You're going to have other websites that might have a more conversational tone, and then you might have some websites that are quite witty or quirky, and they'll have a different tone of voice again. So for example, if it was a website that was maybe in the medical space, or in that kind of, maybe like a finance niche or something like that, then you're going to probably take on a much more professional tone than you would if you were looking at a website that was to do with, I don't know, knitting, for example. My biggest tip when it comes to writing content is to write with the end user in mind. And by that I mean write for real people. Don't try and write for the search engines. Don't try and write in a way that you think this is what Google is going to want. Google wants your website visitors to have the best possible experience. The way they're going to have that best possible experience is if you write for a real person and write something that is going to give them value when they're on your website. So always write with the end user in mind. That being said, you should also have an idea of what your main keyword is for that specific piece of content. So you're probably only going to want to include that keyword 2 or 3 times within a piece of content. That will differ based on the content, but don't worry about that at the writing stage. That's something that you can put in the editing stage, which is what we're going to move on to now. Before we actually move on to the editing stage, I have one bonus tip when it comes to writing, which I'm going to give you in a second. But before that, and whilst you listen to this tip, if you found value in this video, please give us a like. So one thing when it comes to writing is some people have this thing where they say, you know, I've got writer's block and I just can't get into the flow. One thing that I find really useful for that is to change your location. If you're getting a bit stale, just move to a different place. Sometimes, you know, that can make a big difference. Or even go for a 10 or 15 minute walk outside. It resets your brain, it gives you, it freshens you up, and it's a difference when it comes to writing. So I would definitely suggest that you do that if you're struggling. So let's take a look at the editing stage then. So this is probably the most important part when it comes to the SEO. So the first thing we want to focus in on is what is our focus keyword for that particular piece of content. And there's going to be what we call an optimum keyword density within that piece of content. And all that means is it's a fancy way for saying how many times we see that keyword within a certain amount of words on a page. So this is going to differ from keyword to keyword, but more times than not, in my experience, if let's say it's a 3,000 word article, I would probably be looking to include that keyword 3 or 4 times. Now I'm going to have variations of that keyword, so I'm going to have synonyms of that keyword, but I'm not going to just have that one key phrase probably many more times than 3 or 4. Because what we're also going to want to do is to put that keyword into various places that are going to send ranking signals to Google. So let's take a look at this in action. If you do want to look at keyword density in a bit more detail and you really want to nail that down yourself for each particular piece of content, then you can do this just by looking at the results on page 1 of Google, maybe the top 3 or 4, see how many times they used their specific keyword in their content, and go with that. Or you can use tools such as Surfer SEO, which will do this for you, but that is fairly pricey and probably something you don't need at the beginning stages. Now what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to take that main keyword and put it fairly close to the beginning of your article. And although this isn't an absolute deal breaker, it's something that I think is best practice and it's worth trying to do. It doesn't need to be the first sentence, but at least, you know, if you can go somewhere within the first 4 or 5 sentences, I think that's a good place to be. And on top of that, you're going to want to include your main keyword in your meta title and in your URL. We're probably also going to want to include a variation of that keyword in the page title as well. So we've covered the biggest ranking signals there, but there are some other minor ranking signals that we can put in place too. So we're going to want to go through the content. We're going to want one H1 tag per page. Now this is usually set as the page title, but some themes will allow you to alter that. You're also going to want to put some H2 tags in, and we're going to want to use these for our main topics and then H3 and H4 tags for the rest. Now for our H2s, we are going to want to try and include a part of the main keyword within them, but they should also try and be unique with them if you can. We don't want to go too far with the main keyword because we can start to move into the realms of over optimization, which can harm us in Google, which is why I tend to say to people to go for less rather than more when it comes to trying to optimize for a specific keyword. We're also going to want to include images, and we can add keywords to the title of that image and to the alt text. And my top tip when it comes to alt text is to imagine that you're describing that image to someone that can't see it. So, and then write it literally like you would describe it. So we've put so much time and effort into the planning and the writing and the editing. Now it comes to the time to publish the content, which is probably the most exciting time. And at this stage, we want to check that everything is good. So we're going to check the URL once we've published the piece, make sure the page looks good on desktop and mobile. We want to make sure the page isn't orphaned, and what we mean by that is that the page is linked somewhere from the home page within 3 hops. So it might be that you've got a main menu on your website, and then there's a link from there to a category page, and then from that category page your new piece of content is linked. Or you may even add that piece of content within the main navigation itself. The important point here is that there is a link somewhere from the home page to that piece of content, and then it's not orphaned and just out there on its own, kind of floating around without a link back to the home page anywhere, because that's going to make it 10 times harder for that piece of content to rank. Another thing that we can do is to add internal links to the page that are relevant. So if you've got other pieces of content that are relevant to that piece of content, you can link from them, and this works really well, particularly if they've already got if they've already got some power in Google themselves. It really helps to kind of pass that through onto that new page, and it will give it a little bit of a push. If you want to try and get it indexed really quickly and you don't want to wait for Google to manually crawl it, which typically they're going to crawl it within a day or two, so you don't have to do this, but if you're impatient, and sometimes I am, then I will go to Google Search Console and request a manual crawl, which usually gets it to index quicker. One point on this is that Google is being quite pedantic at the moment, and a lot of pages are taking a lot longer to index than they usually would. Then you're going to want to add your main keyword to your rank tracker so that you can track the progress of it. And if you've got social media channels and it makes sense to promote that piece of content on your social media channels, then it makes perfect sense to do that. Social signals are a very small ranking factor, but it's still certainly worthwhile, particularly if you've got a good social following. And to finish, I'm just going to talk very briefly about the writing brief. And this is something that really transformed my process when it came to creating content and really being able to scale up. Now, you might not be at this stage yet, but the chances are that at some point you will want to get your content outsourced. So you're going to need a content brief. Now, I've got a brief that I can send to you by email. So there's a link in the description below. If you click that link, it's going to take you to our affiliate school website, and you can sign up, and it's completely free. You'll get that brief emailed to you. And if you found this video useful, don't forget to give us a like, subscribe, and you might want to check out this video next that talks about keyword research that's going to help you to find those keywords that are rankable in the first place. Thanks for watching, and good luck.